Okay, this is going to be a bit different tonight than in the past weeks, and probably not next week either. We won't do this, but all this discussion from the hashkafic point of view, with Chanukah coming up, it's important to know halachas about Chanukah. What I'd like to do is just use the halachas as a basis to try to give over some more ideas, but at the same time focus on some of the halachas which are important to know. Sefer that I'm using is this, Hilchos Chag B'Chag, Rabbi Karp, who happens to live in Kiryat Sefer. I have seen a lot of halachas svarim in the past, and they're all good in their own way. I have found that this particularly is very good to use because the Hebrew is very clear. First of all, it's very well organized, and he says the halacha, nicely printed too in Hebrew, right? But and at the bottom are all the sources that back up the discussion, because a lot of times there are disagreements amongst the poskim, which are the halachic deciders, and people like to know the background information right down from the Gemara and all that. He brings it all at the bottom. So if you want to look, you can spend some time looking. But if you don't want to look, so the halacha is very straightforward. But I think it's good. It's a good change of pace also just to see some halachas and just discuss them a bit because it's a very specific thing. I mean, it's not just a simple case of lighting a menorah and that's it. To some degree, yes, but not completely. There are a lot of details, and you might as well get it right because it is such an important mitzvah. So this is actually chapter 6 on the laws of Chanukah, Zman Hadlaka V'Shira, right? The actual time for lighting and the amount that it should burn for. Okay, so first of all, off the bat, it's known obviously that there's a difference between Israel and in the diaspora. In Israel, the tradition is for the most part to light outdoors whenever you can. Even in apartment buildings, people tend to light by the entrance or in the window up above, but or in their hallways. But that's the mitzvah, the chachil in Eretz Israel. And in the diaspora, the tradition is to often light in the houses because of the fact that it was dangerous once upon a time to light outside, and we got used to do it inside as a result of that. And that became the tradition ongoing. It could be some people do light it outdoors in different places, different countries. I'm trying to remember what it was like in Toronto, but as far as I know, people live in the window very often, facing the street. But so there are some differences of halacha, which will come up a bit. Anyhow, the first thing he says is mitzvasa mishatishka hachamav shatikla regel b'nashur. This is right from the Talmud itself. The actual mitzvah of the menorah, lighting the menorah, is from the time of the setting of the sun, and that sounds simple, but that's not simple. We'll see, shortly what the discussion is there. But from the setting of the sun until the legs literally stop from the marketplace. Now, of course, a long time ago, the time of the Talmud, it's not like today where you have shopping malls and things like that. And more importantly, it's not like we have, back then they didn't have incandescent lighting. For the most part, people shopped until it got dark, and they didn't have such great lighting in the marketplace, so to speak. And people usually stopped at that time. So the whole point of lighting the menorah is what's called presumi nisa. That's to proclaim the miracle. There's no proclamation of miracle. There's nobody around to see it. So therefore, the time that was determined for actually the mitzvah itself should be from the time that the sun sets until people stop walking the streets. Today, people walk the streets until 11 o'clock at night, and that does change the halacha to some degree in terms of how late you can light. But nonetheless, that is the basic format from the time the sun sets until people stop walking in the streets. What is that specifically? Bizman zeh hu kechetzi sha'a. And altogether, all said and told, that the actual time frame for the burning of the menorah is about half an hour, 30 minutes. That's the basic mitzvah. The af, even in places where they light inside the house. And the only people who are going to see it are the people inside the house. Obviously, you light it on the kitchen table. Then the only people you're proclaiming the miracle to are the people living in the house, and they could be walking around all times of the day, and it's not the same situation. So what's the halacha? It's still the same amount of time, about a half an hour. So it says, and really, you should be careful about this time. It shouldn't burn for less than this time, about a half an hour. We have to see exactly what that means. That's just the general framework for the actual mitzvah. And it says, Ein machirin v'lo makdimin. And ideally speaking, you should not light later than this time, and you should not light earlier than this time. This is the specific time. Now, we'll get into the discussion. Nechalku haposkim b'techilas mana. So, like a lot of things in Jewish halacha, that Jewish law, that there's a disagreement amongst rabbis as to exactly what this means. It sounds simple, it sounds pretty basic, but it turns out that there are different opinions as to what this actually means. So it says, Yesh Omrim, there are some who say, Shezmana misof hashkia dahainu mitzetzu chochavim. Some say it's from the time at the end of Shkia. What is Shkia? Shkia is the setting of the sun. What exactly is the setting of the sun? Well, you can actually today just look on your calendars, and it pretty much tells you. The one that's provided by the weather stations is not exactly the same as the halachic Shkia. There, I think for the most part, they go by when it disappears behind the horizon, but we can go by the tops of trees, tops of mountains. It depends when the sun is out of sight for you. So therefore, for example, sundown is different in Tel Aviv than it is in Telston where I live, somewhat, because they're down by sea level and the sun takes longer to set. So the it's a period of time. Shkia is not, on one hand, it's just a single moment. There's a moment, you watch the sun set. Last night was unbelievable. I was walking, in Telston, and one of those very rare sunsets, because we face towards Tel Aviv in one direction, and there's mountains. So I have a certain clear view towards these mountains. See, the sun sets over the distance. Beautiful, beautiful, pinkish orange, big fiery ball. And I made the mistake of waiting 3-4 seconds till I was in a different position because there was a fence in front of me. I didn't want to take a picture of the fence in front of me, but by the time I got to the place, there was no fence. The sun basically set. It's just, it went down. It was like almost out of picture altogether. And behind me was the moon already. And it was almost the 15th. Tonight's the 15th. Beautiful moon this evening also. The last night was a clear sky. So you had this beautiful sunset, and the moon was like this big, huge orangey ball. I was like, anyone else seeing this? So this is like a beautiful situation. But you see, the sun takes a while to set. It goes down below the horizon. It starts to dip down, and then it could take a period of time. So this has other ramifications. For example, in terms of davening, mincha, the afternoon prayer. So until what time can you actually pray mincha? What is the latest time? Ideally, you should always finish the last blessing of the Shemona Esrei of mincha before the sun actually sets. But sometimes you can be lenient and go a little bit into it. Depends what time the sunset actually is. So the end of the sunset basically is when night begins. So that's when 3 medium-sized stars come out in eye's view. Not like there's one and there's one. Like when you can look up and you can see basically 3 medium-sized stars, then that's called Tzeis Kochavim. The stars have come out, and that's also calculated. So for example, for the beginning of the sunset until the actual 3 stars coming out in Israel, at least where I live, is about 18 minutes. So most minyanim wait to daven Mariv, the evening prayer, about 20 minutes from the time the sun sets until Mariv itself. 2 minutes leeway there. Make sure you're saying the Shema at the proper time. So some say that when we say from Shkia, it means from the end of Shkia. So how long is actually Shkia? So basically, there's 2 periods of time. One's called Shkia, the sunset. The word Shkia, the Shkia is to set, to sink, right? So that's called Shkia. And another was called Ben Hashmashos, which is kind of like an overlap of day and night. So we said there's 18 minutes altogether, right? 18 minutes for the entire period of time, but really 13 minutes from the time the sun actually sets in your locale until the end of 13 minutes. That's the full Shkia. And after that comes Ben Hashmashos, and you go into already what might be evening at that time. But they hold at the end of that period of time, that's when you should actually light. The Chayn Pesach HaMechaber. So the Shulchan Aruch, which is the for the most part, that's the body of law that we follow. But the Ramah, who is an Ashkenazi posting, a posting is the person who makes halachic decisions for the generation community, and we have an Ashkenazi one. So the Sfardim tend to follow the Shulchan Aruch, which is Rav Yosef Karo, who lived in the 1500s, and we tend to follow, the Ashkenazim tend to follow the Ramah. So they go according to his opinion. Veishomrim, and the other opinion is that the Shizmana mitchila shkia, the Hainu mitchila zman ben shmashis v'hu kareva shah kodem. So some say that the time to light is actually the beginning of the sun setting, when it just begins to set. So for example, today, the sun set here about 4:40, more or less 4:41, I think it's 4:40 and some odd minutes. So a person would light at that time, right? Mincha would be earlier, and then you'd come home, and you'd light about 4:40 according to this opinion. According to the second, so my neighbor holds of the first opinion. So I'm lighting at 4:40 basically, and because next week won't be much of a difference, like 4:41 or something like that, 4:42. But he doesn't light until the 3 stars come out. So he's all set up across the road. So when he's setting up, he's watching me light. When I'm coming home, I'm watching him light in there because of these 2 different opinions. So that's our opinion. It says a quarter of an hour. So it depends. It goes on to say, and this is the way the Pri Chadash v'Hagra, the Vilna Gaon, decided as well. So that's the way most Ashkenazim do it at the beginning of Shki itself. When you look at the calendars, usually the time that's being shown to you is the beginning of the sunset in your area. Again, you can go kind of by the weather stations, sunset to some degree, because it's not so off, but it can be off by 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes sometimes because of the way they make their calculations. There's all mathematical calculations. Ours is also, but based upon a different standard. So it says, so that's the way most people, I think, in Jerusalem, whether you're Ashkenazi or not, they call it Yerushalmis. They have the tradition because Jerusalem tends to go after the Vilna Gaon, who lived in the 18th century, died in 1790. He was a major halachic decider for the Ashkenazim, people, and he held by this opinion. So therefore, that is the prevailing Ashkenazic approach. The Sfardim will light at pretty much nightfall, and the Ashkenazim will light at the beginning of the sunset. And this is also the way that Rav Soloveitchik and also the Chazon Ish, the famous rabbis who lived in the last century, right? They would light Besim Dakot Achar Shkia. They would 20 minutes after Shkia. They would, to all opinions. Okay, fine. That's the beginning. Yesh Omrim, some say, Shetfilas Arvis Bizmana Kodemus Lalakis Ner Chaynukah Shitadira. You have 2 mitzvahs to do, and they come at the same time. Which one comes first? Now, sometimes one mitzvah can be put off, but we don't like putting off mitzvahs. There's a concept called Ein Marvinin Ala Mitzvahs. A mitzvah comes to your hand, you're supposed to do it right away. First of all, because it shows your zealousness, and second of all, because you never know what's going to happen next. A lot of times you say, I'll do it later on, but something else comes up. I'll daven mincha later on, and before you know, there's a phone call, an emergency, God forbid, and you could have done it earlier, but you put it off. So we don't like to push off mitzvahs. So someone, let's say, for example, who every day, this is usually what I try to do, a lot of people do the same thing as well, they daven the evening prayer right away when 3 stars come out, or 20 minutes after the time the sun is set. And you also have the opinion to light your menorah at that time. So which comes first? So the concept is the mitzvah you tend to do on an ongoing basis more regularly has precedence. So if you're davening the evening prayer every single day at that time, and the mitzvah of lighting the menorah comes around once a year for 8 days, so then you would daven Mari first, and then come home and light the menorah as soon as you come home. That's what he's saying. Some say, of course, we Jews like to have discussions about these things, right? So some say, on the other hand, right, that the Ner Chanukah comes first, right? Because of the fact that there's a very specific time to light it. From the time the sun, 3 stars come out, according to this opinion, and for half an hour, So Mariv, you could always daven later. You can always go until literally halfway through the night, and if you really have to, until the next morning, basically. You can push it off. and it's still the same Mariv, still the same evening prayer. But the time to light the menorah is, we said, specifically at the beginning of the evening and not halfway through the night. So therefore, others say that normally, we normally tell you to do the mitzvah that you more commonly do first. In this case, we wouldn't say that because we want to make sure that you do the mitzvah of the menorah properly at the right time. If you're somebody who is, your tradition is to light at nightfall as opposed to the sunset, like we're saying, so then he's just telling you that you have to make sure that you set up early. You don't come home at that time and begin setting up your menorah. Because by the time you come home and set it up, you find the oil, get the menorah, get it on place, the phone rings, all these things, you can end up being a lot later, way past the time. So therefore, if you're somebody who's going to light when 3 stars come out, or let's say, for example, you can't get home on time. Normally you light at sunset, but the bus is late, or for some reason, and you're delayed, and you realize that you won't be able to light until after, and there's only one time to daven Mariv, because the other minyan's at 11 o'clock at night, and you don't want to go there at that time. So in which case you come home, set up quickly, go daven Mariv, come back and light, and not, it should already be ready for you to light by the time you come home. Because if you're down, then things will delay you, and you'll go way past the time. What happens? For example, you're lighting the menorah, right? You begin to light one candle, and always you look at your watch and you say, "Uh-oh, right? It's already time to daven Mariv." So what do I do? So you don't stop. You can, if it's the first night, there's no problem because only one candle anyhow. But if it's the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth night, this happens. So once you begin lighting the menorah, you finish all the candles. Now you might say, well, it's obvious, right? Why not? It's all in mitzvah. So why would you stop in the middle of the mitzvah? So you have to remember that the actual mitzvah of the menorah is only one candle per night per household. To fulfill the mitzvah as minimally, you need one menorah and one candle each of the 8 nights. It's what we call a hitter mitzvah, for example, that you light 8 candles, or you increase the amount of candles each night. And this has applications. For example, what if you only have enough oil for 8 nights, 1 candle, or let's say, 3 nights, with increasing candles? And what do you do? So since the mitzvah is only 1 candle per night, of course, it's best to use the oil over the course of 8 nights. So that's why you might have thought that if I lit 1 candle, I can stop, run to shul, daven, come back and light the other 7 candles, because anyhow, they're just adding to the mitzvah, just beautifying the mitzvah. There's a very big mitzvah by Chaynukah to beautify, get a nice menorah, make sure it's clean, use good shemen zayis. Some people, you don't have to use shemen zayis that's edible, but it's preferable because that's what was used in the temple. The temple used very pure, refined olive oil, and we're trying to imitate that because this is a throwback also to the menorah in the temple. So that's what it says. Okay. Okay, this is a halacha for somebody, let's say, who in general davens Mariv at 10 o'clock at night. Normally, that's what he does all year round. He davens at 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night. And now during Chaynukah, he's thinking to himself, well, there's a minyan there, because a lot of times during Chaynukah, a lot of shuls, what they do, because since people are home anyhow to light the menorah, not so much in the diaspora, in Chutz La'aretz, more in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of people are able to come home on time to light the menorah. So since so many people are home anyhow on time, and since all year round there might be a Mariv at 8:30 in the shul, they move it to 5:30, or they have 2 minyanim, one at 5:30, let's say, and one at 8:30. The regular at 8:30 and a new one for Chaynukah at 5:30. And he says to himself, well, it would be nice to be able to come home and daven at 5:30, or 5 o'clock, whatever, push off the lighting, and at least daven Mariv and come home for the night, sort of watch the menorah. So in a situation like that, he says you shouldn't do that. If you're used to davening later at night, better to light the menorah on time and then daven at the later minyan. But anyhow, usually the way it works out is that, at least for Ashkenazim, it works out perfectly fine, because we light anyhow at the beginning of Shkia, and they usually have Mariv right after that, around 5 o'clock or 5:05 or 5:15, depends on how much time they give you to enjoy your menorah before you go to shul, and that's fine. But that's the halach he brings down. Okay. Hey, yesh misha omer she'im hu tarud v'lo yuchal ladlik bebeisa b'zman hadlaka ad shetichle regel b'nashur. What happens? The person, he's in a meeting, right? He's busy. He got caught in traffic, or he's just got so much to do that has to get done before tomorrow, and he's like tarud. He's like distracted. His mind, is all over the place because he's uptight, right? Would be a good expression. And he's just not going to get home on time to be able to light during that time frame when the people stop walking the streets. What? Interesting situation. Okay, let's say that you work for a company, they scheduled a meeting for 4:50 in the afternoon. The meetings tend to go long, right? They tend to go past the time that you want to be there. And you know that there's a good chance, more than likely, it's going to go past 5 o'clock, 5:30, whatever the time of the lighting of the menorah, you'll be stuck in this meeting. And by the time you come home, it might be 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, so late after everybody has stopped walking the streets, or at least the official time you're supposed to light. So he's saying that you can actually light earlier in the day, right? Before, let's say, for example, before the time, what we call plag mincha, which is about, I think, an hour and a quarter before the sun sets. So it's very much day. It's just like bringing Shabbos early while still day. Same type of time situation. So you would light then, but you have to make sure there's enough oil in your candle to keep burning the entire time into the night, a half an hour. It's not so hard because the average, you can buy candle, if you're using wax candles, then they can be long, right? But when it comes to the Shem and Zayas, usually the glass containers, they burn for about 2 hours. If you fill them up with oil. If you put water in too, then they burn for less time. But if you put 2 hours, this has a practical application on Erev Shabbos, for example. Because on Erev Shabbos, we don't light so close to sunset because of Shabbos. Normally, we can light sunset during the week because, there's no problem lighting fire after sunset. But Erev Shabbos, there is. So we tend to distance it from Shkia as much as possible, and therefore it's going to have to burn longer. So therefore, at least one candle has to have enough oil to burn the entire period into half an hour into the night. And of course, you can't once the sun sets, you can't relight it again. You can't fix it. So it's got to go right. So I know that a lot of people every year, they can't wait to come home from shul on Friday night to see that their candle's still burning, that it didn't go up before the time, because it's burning for a longer period of time. So anyhow, that's what he's saying. You could light a little bit early if you have to, but make sure there's enough oil to go into half an hour into the night itself. Okay. Vav, this is an important point. What does it mean that people stop walking in the marketplace? Well, today, people go shopping in malls till 9 o'clock at night. Not maybe because of Corona, because today the malls aren't necessarily open, but people are around. They're walking and they're up. The streets have people walking till 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, because we have street lights. We have artificial lighting in houses. So for us, night is almost like day to some degrees. Nonetheless, the halacha remains the same. A half an hour from the time that the sun sets, which he says basically even longer. It's a half an hour from 3 stars. So for example, the sun sets here at 4:40. 20 minutes later, we call night. When 3 stars come out, that's already going to be 5 o'clock. It has to burn at least until 5:30. So I'm lighting at 4:40. So altogether, it has to have enough oil to burn for 20 minutes plus 50 minutes altogether. After that, after the 50 minutes, it can keep burning all night. But there's no mitzvah involved anymore. You might enjoy it. That's okay. No problem. Sitting around watching the menorah. I mean, some people relight it even after because it's nice to have the light of the menorah burning the entire time because of what it represents and what it means. Some people have a menorah outside the house, as the halacha requires, and one on the dining room table. So that while you're eating, you have a menorah too. It depends how much you love the mitzvah, how much you're into it. But the essential mitzvah is about 50 minutes from the time the sun sets to a half an hour after the 3 stars come out. That's the time frame for the mitzvah. After that, just olive oil burning. It says, if a person in bnei bayis arim, what happens? A father comes home, or anyone comes home, right? He got delayed, or he forgot. For some reason, he could not, he didn't plan his day properly, or something happened he didn't plan for. Turns out he's coming home well into the night. He didn't get back in time for sunset. He didn't get back in time for the 3 stars. It's now about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, maybe even later. And he has not lit the menorah yet. What does he do? Does he light the menorah? So it says that if there are people still up in the house, then you can't, because don't forget, the point of the menorah is to proclaim the miracle. Although the truth is that you do that also for yourself too. One of the halachas, let's say, in fact, the rabbi spoke about this in my shul on Friday night. Let's say a person has to be in Iceland for some reason during Chaynukah, okay? Very far away. There probably is a Chabad house there, but let's say that there isn't, okay? There's no Jews around. You're staying in a hotel, in a big room, you know, whatever, with other people, you know, and there's no one else around. You have to light the menorah. There's no Jews to see what you're doing. So the halach is you still would light the menorah because it's a proclamation of the miracle before you too. So you'd light it without a blessing, no blessing on the lighting itself. Don't go to Iceland for Chaynukah. The rest of the year, I heard it's beautiful there. Anyhow, so it says you can light the entire night. But Nechon, now here's interesting halacha. So you came home, right, to light your menorah. It's 11:30 at night, and everyone's gone to bed. Now what? What do you do now? So he says, it's right. Shekitz al kol parim shnai mibnei bayis. The right thing to do would be, normally we say, you don't wake people up from their sleep. It's considered to be, it's an issur, a prohibition to wake a person up from their sleep if they want to be sleeping. If they want to get up and they ask you to wake them up or it's time to get up, then it's a mitzvah to wake them up. But if it's in the middle of the night when most people are sleeping and they're supposed to be sleeping, if you wake a person up by being careless, that's called geneva shena. You're stealing a person's sleep. You have to be careful about that, right? But in this case, the halacha allows you to go in, right, and pull them up by the feet from their bed, right, or tickle them or pour cold water, whatever you want, to get them up to come and witness your lighting of the menorah. They may not like you for doing this, and it might be advisable to give them something that they're going to enjoy after that to make it all worth their while, or perhaps work it out in advance, you know, make a deal with them or something like that. But the halacha would be that you came home late, you're lighting the menorah, wake up 2 people, and then you can light your menorah with a bracha. The bnei bayis yeshanim yadlik below bracha. Let's say they're all sleeping, no one wants to get up, you don't want to wake them up, they told you, you wake us up, that's the end of you. Forget it. You can't do it. You're in yeshiva, right? You don't wake up your fellow. You can't start knocking on doors in the yeshiva to wake up people. They don't sleep enough as it is, right? You can't do it. You come back late at night. There's a menorah. You light it for yourself. No bracha though. You don't make a bracha on the lighting itself. You can make the bracha al nisa the shas nisim of because that goes every day anyhow. But you don't make the bracha like ner shel Chaynukah or Chaynukah, whatever the case may be. The safed bracha lahakel acha mavarach ein mochim yado. So, since there are different opinions when it comes to an argument about whether a blessing is necessary or not, we tend to say you're lenient, meaning you don't make the blessing because you might be taking God's name in vain. But he adds, there's someone for some reason, there's some people, I gotta make that bracha. I gotta do it. It's like, can't go without that, and he makes the bracha. In this case, you don't say, hey, that's supposed to be a bracha. You don't have to protest. You don't take your son of the closet and your anti-bracha, sign, walk around him, parade around him with your, poster saying, no bracha, no bracha. You could just let the guy do it and keep it to yourself. And maybe point the halakha to him before tomorrow or the next time. But if he makes the bracha, he has who to rely upon, and therefore he can do it. what we've spoken about until now, that's in the situation because people are lighting inside the house. These halachas apply inside the house. But those people who light outside, like we do in the streets, and I gotta tell you, personally, it's one of the most beautiful times of the year. One of the nicest places to be in the world when lighting the menorah is in the old city. But even most streets, it's also very beautiful because you see all the menorahs. It gives off this nice glow at nighttime. But in the old city, because the walls are very close to each other and they go very high on the streets, and people put their menorahs in the walls themselves, and there's just like this awesome sense of Hanukkah light, like bouncing off the walls everywhere you go. But anywhere you see the menorahs burning outside, and the more the lights, the more it's true. It's a very, very beautiful time. So he says that anybody who lights outside like they're supposed to, right? Then the halacha basically is, especially today, when people are still walking around hours after sunset, you can make the bracha as you light even late at night, unless it's like 1 o'clock in the morning when there's absolutely no one walking around. Hagia los shacher. Let's say a person, for whatever reason, they took a flight, they came home, and so late they got stuck at customs. They thought they'd be home hours ago. It didn't work out that way. Couldn't get a taxi. By the time they finally get home, it's literally the next, like it's what we call alos shacher. It's about this morning. Alos shacher. It's about 4:59, 5 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And it's already technically speaking going to be morning. Can they still light? Because there's a period of time, just like by sunset, there's a period of time where it's what we call doubtful day and doubtful night. There's an overlap. Likewise, there's a period of doubtful night and doubtful morning. And there's also laws to do with prayer at that time, whether you can daven mariv or shacharis and what you can and can't do at that time. Can you still light the menorah for the previous day once it gets to this point called the sun, the pillar of the sun? It's still dark, by the way. It's quite dark at alos shachar. This time in the morning, it looks like night still. It's more of a technical reality than actual physical reality yet. But very shortly, you'll see the sun start coming up, which is also very beautiful to watch as well. And he's saying right here, you should not light. Once that happens, then you've lost the mitzvah for that day. And you light again the next day regularly. Why does he have to add this? Because there's another mitzvah called Sfiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, which we do from Pesach until Shavuos. What happens if a person misses counting one of the 49 days, but he realizes the next morning before the day's over? So then he can count, but no bracha. But the next night he can go back to counting again. What if he misses the day altogether? He forgot the entire time, the night, the next morning, it's already the next night. Oh, I forgot to count the Omer the day before. From that point onward, he can count the Omer, but no blessing the rest of the 49 days, whatever's left over. So that's why he's making this distinction, because by the menorah, it's not that way. If a person loses one day of lighting the menorah, they can still light the rest of the nights like as if nothing went wrong. With the bracha, all the conditions apply. So he says, okay, continue on. Shir has shemen shebener tzarich shia b'chtei should look ad shetikla regel min hashuk shu le'erech chatzi sha'ah. So we already mentioned, the amount of oil necessary in the menorah to be able to fulfill the mitzvah properly. We said it was until the time that people start walking in the marketplace. Technically, it's a technical time, and that's about a half an hour from the time that the 3 stars come out. Right? Even if you're in the house, even though you're lighting in the house, and it's not relevant the marketplace anymore because you're dealing with people in the house and not people outside. Nonetheless, the amount of oil you're supposed to use or the time that the candle is allowed to burn or should burn is the same amount of time as if you were lighting outside. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Are people understanding what I'm saying?
Rabbi Winston, I was taught like to have the light shine in the window so that it can be seen from outside.
Yeah. So it depends upon the situation. There's a secondary halacha. He actually addresses it inside here, but there's a halacha that the menorah is not allowed to be placed higher than 20 amas. An amma is about 18 to 2 feet in distance. So basically, technically speaking, a menorah is not supposed to be higher than about, 1.5 feet times 20 would be 36 to 40 feet. It's about 4 stories, between 3 and 4 stories. Because as the Gemara says, when the menorah is placed at high, people from the street can't really see it clearly. Now you could use a big menorah, but it's not necessarily going to happen. So there's a problem. Let's say if your person's like higher than 3 stories up high, then there's a problem with lighting from the street because up that high, because it's not within the realm of the halacha. I'm going to see someone's a chat here. Hold on. Okay. Yeah, depends where in the world. True. But so the halacha basically would be to light inside the house on the table for other people to see. Other people, for example, here light in their hallways, but if there's a stairwell going down, you can't do that in Toronto. Certainly not in that apartment building because there's a fire code and things like that. There's no way you get away with that and probably get a fine for it. So the best thing would be to light it on the kitchen table, dining room table, and ideally have other people either come in for the lighting or have them come over for the lighting so that you can light it with the blessing and they can see it inside the house itself. Right? That's the ideal situation. If a person is facing the street and they're within this, let's say 30 to 40 feet, so then they could light the window facing the public domain where people might be able to see it. There's even halacha, for example, that how important is this? Let's say, for example, you have a courtyard, which is what we have, a lot in Israel. The house opens into a courtyard, then opens to the street. Let's say you have a courtyard on both sides of your house, and both sides of this house are, you're bordered by 2 public domains, one on that side and one this side. So the halacha is you have to light a menorah on both sides. You make a bracha on the one. I don't think you make a bracha on the second one. I think only on the first one, but there has to be menorah burning on both sides, because someone walking on that side can't see the menorah on this side and might think you didn't like the menorah. They don't know you have a menorah on the other side, so you would light on both sides of the house. But the main thing is we're lighting the menorah. Not, it's a mistake to think that we're only lighting the menorah as a commemoration of the miracle, so therefore it doesn't make a difference who sees it, as long as it's lit to commemorate. That's only one aspect of it. The main reason we're lighting the menorah is to proclaim the miracle to the world that God performed for the Jewish people. So therefore, we either do it in a way that the people outside can see it publicly, or that it can be seen inside the house by the people living in the house. Any other questions so far?
Yeah, aside from the menorah,
yeah,
where did it originate to have the latkes on Hanukkah? Ganya?
Well, no, I don't know the exact year. I think it was the potato farmers. They got this thing going. But the whole point is that it's the oil. There's actually 2 traditions: oil and milchs, cheesy products, because it says that during the war that Yehudis, who was one of the Greek generals, right? She gave him milk, and that made him drowsy, and he slept, and she killed him, and that was one of the reasons why the war turned around. So milk is a big thing, milk products. So putting sour cream on your luck is like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, basically. But the luck is only because it's being deep fried, and to symbolize that the miracle is done with the oil, or the miracle that happened with the oil. So I don't know the exact year, but it's a long tradition. I think the best luck I've ever had in my entire life were the ones made by my cheder. At least that's what I remember when I was a young kid. We used to all get together, on Chaynukah, and big huge assembly. They made latkes for everybody. They were always like crispy, burned, thin little, latkes, but they always tasted amazing. I tried to replicate them, but anyhow. Any other questions meantime?
Yeah. What if you live in a corner house and you have streets on both sides?
It has to do with how many openings you have.
You mean doors?
Like an opening to the street, to the sidewalk, right?
Oh, well, usually you only have 1 door.
Right, but sometimes people have on 2 sides. let's say, for example, in a situation where you have two streets, so to make it easier, they put a gate on both sides. Not necessarily, but it can happen. In a situation like that, we're saying you like two menorahs. But if you only have one opening, then and of course the way it works in terms of the opening is that if you have a mezuzah, which you're only going to have if you have an archway, right? If you have, it's like an outdoor gate, for example. A lot of people have gates to their courtyards, but no lintel, right? Or lintel, not lintel. Lintel's what you eat. Lintel, right? No lintel above, right? The top, it's only, it's open above, just, two sides and a low gate. So then you don't have a mezuzah. But if you happen to build like a ladders or something, over your doorway, so it's an official doorway with a mezuzah, then of course you light your menorah on the left-hand side, because the mezuzah is on the right-hand side, and you put the menorah on the left-hand side. You have mitzvahs on both sides of the doorway. The Pri Tzaddik, which we may speak about next week, B'ezras Hashem, he explains the whole rationale and the Kabbalah behind the mezuzah on the right-hand side, representing the written law, right? Because the mezuzah has two parshiot of the Shema inside of it, and that's part of the written law from Devarim, Parshas Akiv and Parshas Eschanan and Parshas Akiv, right? Two parshiot, and the menorah is about the oral law, right? There are two parts to Torah: the written law, which is the 5 books of Moshe, right? The Chamishu Chumshei Torah, the Chumash, which we take out on Shabbos and we read to the congregation, and the oral law, which is basically the Mishnah. That's the body of the oral law, and the midrashim and all those other aspects that are part of Torah, but not in written explicitly in the written law. So Chaynukah is considered to be a celebration, a holiday of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral law. We've been talking about the Or HaGenuz the entire time, the light that God made on the first day of creation, the hidden light of creation. Right? And how Chaynukah is a prison for that light. It's a conduit, the funnel for that light into the world. So that light comes through the oral law. So that's why the Greeks were the ones with the antithesis, because as it says in Koheles, which is Ecclesiastes for those who are not aware, right, that everything that God made, He made a counterpart. Kol Elokim zeh lumazeh, or asah. Elohim, something to that effect. There's a pasuk from Koheles. Everything that God made on the side of holiness, He made a counterpart on the side of impurity. So that's why you see in the Al Nisim prayer in your Shemona Esrei, it's set up in such a way where the arrogant are in the hands of the people who learn Torah, the impure in the hands of the people of purity. Or why they go back and forth? Because that's what's going on over here. So even though the rest of the world considers that Greek philosophy, that's the light into the nations, the Medrash very specifically calls the Greeks darkness. They're called choshech. And Aristotle and his philosophies and all that came into the world around the same time that Chaynukah took place. Alexander, he was the beginning of the exile, 180 years earlier than the time of the Chashmonaim, Shimon Tzaddik at that time. And that's when Hellenism was spreading to the world. That's when we had Hellenists, and we call Misyavnim in Hebrew, and their influx of knowledge was considered to be the counterpart of the influx of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, that basically is what we learn in yeshivas this very day, and is what it keeps growing. Right, what I'm telling you right now, all this discussion is part of the oral law. Books upon books upon books upon books upon books explaining the written law and the laws and all that, and the commentaries and all the Rashi, right? Part of the oral law, and the Ramban. It's all part of the oral law. Of course, the Mishnah is the basis of the oral law and our halacha, and that's what Chaynukah celebrates. The Or HaGenuz is inside there. It comes out through there, not like a trick to try and convince you to learn Torah. It's a reality. This is how you access the oral law, and Chaynukah is all about that time. Yanai, who became a Hellenist king, he was a Jew, became a Hellenist, right? So they stopped the learning of the oral law. The Greeks did not like their learning of the oral law, so they prohibited it because they didn't believe in anything they couldn't understand, they could relate to. Seeing is believing, as far as they're concerned. To say it was part of a prophecy, we can't see it. We don't want anything to do with it. And that was the battle. And the Chanukah came along to free us once again to be able to learn the oral law. And that goes on unto this very day. So you have the mezuzah on the right hand side, which represents the written law, and the menorah on the left hand side, which represents the light of the oral law and the oral ganus that comes to the hidden light of Christ that comes to it. Then, if you're wearing tzitzis, talis at the same time, so then you're going through this. There's 3 mitzvahs all at one time, right? You're wearing your tzitzis, and it says, there's a verse that says that a rope or something that has 3 strands never breaks. So it's a verse in I think in Mishlei. I can't remember exactly where it comes from, and they say it applies to this. The person who lights has a mezuzah, person who lights the menorah, and is wearing tzitzis at the same time. So that person is in a sense concretizes their Yiddishkeit, their Judaism, and it stays strong with them hopefully forever. Anyhow, he goes on to say, Im ichar midladlik acher shetishka acham. A person has gone past the time the sun has set to light the menorah. Ein tzrich liten shemen b'shir chetzi she'ela ad hazman shetich leregel min hashur. So now a person has already gone past the time. He's a half an hour, or let's say 50 minutes. We're saying the actual time period is a half an hour from the time the 3 stars come out until a half an hour later. He's now lighting only 15 minutes after the 3 stars have come out. It's well into night now. There's only 15 minutes left of the half an hour. Does he still have to put a half an hour's worth of oil into his menorah? The answer is no. You just have to get to that time, that threshold of the half an hour. If you're 50 minutes late, you only require 50 minutes of oil from that point onward, or a shorter candle. You could put the candle out. Let's say, take an example, right? A person, has come home late. It's already, nighttime. It's already, 5 o'clock. By the time he gets his menorah set up, it's now 5:15. There's only now 15 minutes left until that time period we're talking about. And his candle, he lights his candle at 5:15. He gets to 5:30. He can put it out. They can put the candle and save the rest for tomorrow. There's no mitzvah for the candle to burn longer than that 15 minutes because it's not relative to your lighting. It's relative to the sunset. You're late. It's over. You can put the candle out. You can put your jar of oil out and save the rest of the oil for tomorrow. If that becomes a situation. Like we just said, only for 15 minutes, right? That's all. Okay. Im noisen harbesh shemen shidlok zman rav ein b'zeh mitzvah. You figure, I just love the mitzvah of menorah, and I love seeing it burn for hours upon hours. I mean, you come home sometimes and the menorah is burning 4 hours. And there's times you light, you stay there for half an hour, you go out, you go to a Chanukah Masiba someplace, you come back 3-4 hours later, there's one candle still burning, the entire time, just about to go out, right? Did you do the mitzvah longer? Did you get any extra reward for that? And the answer is no, because the mitzvah is only until a half an hour after 3 stars come out. But there's no sin in that, right? For sure not. And you certainly have beautified the mitzvah. It shows that, and people get to enjoy it more. So you get something else from it. But as far as the mitzvah of menorah is concerned, it's over. When the time is over, when that half an hour is over, that's it. Okay. Of a Menorah Shava, yesh hid the mitzvah ladlik kashen aruchas. However, it's different if you're using candles versus oil. Okay. If you're using candles, then there's an addition. It's nice to use a longer mitzvah. Even though, see, by Shem and Zayas, it's the same jar of oil. Whether you put a little jar in or a lot. Whether you put some water in or no water, it's the same jar of oil. But by candles, it's either long or short. It changes the size and therefore changes the appearance. It doesn't look nice to light a short candle. You can put it out early, like we said, but when you light it, at least use a regular candle. It may be you're light for 5 minutes. That's all, because that's all the time it's left. You're going to save the rest of the candle for tomorrow, right? Better to light the real candle and then put it out than use a short candle and let it burn out on its own. Because there's an additional beautification of the mitzvah by using a full candle. But don't go ahead. Oh wow, if you want long candles, here I got one of these nice dining candles. It's like a foot and a half long. Let me put those up there. No, that's already looking what they call mugzam. That looks a little strange already. It's not exactly appropriate to do that. So don't do that. A nice candle. The Yeshu Omrim Shekol Ze Lemadlikim Bifnim of a Madlikim Bechutz Ki Ikra Tekana B'Mukaimes Sheregel Rabbi Mitzvah B'Shuk Achia Miacheres Yeshit Mitzvah Upirsum Neis Shadlik Zman Rav Achetichle Mimash Regel Harabi Minashuk. Okay, so some say, there's lots of some says over here because there's a lot of opinions regarding the halachas of Chanukah. And some say what we just spoke about, all of that, that's talking about inside the house. Because inside the house, the people are there, they go to bed, that's it, right? The mitzvah is done. But outside, especially today, when people are walking around at all hours of the night, so then he says there might, according to some, there is still a mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, even after the half an hour. What comes out of all this basically is that if you're lighting outside, right? Ideally speaking, you light when the sun sets, if you're Ashkenaz. That is basically 4:40 here in Israel. You can check your time clock, but it's the beginning of the sunset. If you're Sephardi, then you would light at the end of the sunset, which is right before nightfall. Either way, it has to burn for a half an hour after night begins. Now, in different parts of the world, for example, it takes longer. The sun takes about 45 minutes to set in New York, 40 to 45 minutes. So nightfall is about 40 minutes. That's why people daven early. They daven early Mariv. In Israel, we don't have that problem. It's only 20 minutes from the end of Mincha to the beginning of Mariv. Very rarely do people daven right back to back Mincha Mariv. Not really supposed to do that anyhow, unless you daven Mincha on earlier than the Mariv earlier as well. That's a different halacha altogether, especially when it comes to Shabbos. But that's Eretz Yisrael. But in Chutz La'aretz, in New York or Toronto or Montreal, places like that, or London, especially in London, right? The time period of time between the time the sun sets to the three stars come out could be a very long period of time. So people often, daven Mariv early because they don't want to hang out in shul for 45, 50 minutes. So then the amount of oil that's going to be burning could be a lot more based upon when the sun actually sets. But using Eretz Yisrael as the model example, 20 minutes plus the 30 minutes, 50 minutes altogether. You come home late. If you're lighting outside, you light with the brocha because of the fact that people are still walking around even after the time. You light in the house itself. There should be people there when you make your brocha. If there are not people there, you should wake up two people if you can. If you cannot wake up anybody, then you light without making the blessing until the morning. And if you happen to make a blessing, don't kick yourself. No one has to yell at you because some people say you can make the blessing anyhow. That's just a rough overview of the halachas of lighting the menorah. There's many halachas about the placing of it, how high it's supposed to be. For example, the menorah, ideally speaking, when it's outside, should not be higher than 10 tefachim. 10 tefachim is about, I think, 18 inches off the ground, the top of the flame. Some put it higher, but ideally it should be closer to the ground. One of the reasons for that is because of the fact that we're talking about the Or HaGanuz. We mentioned before that when God made the world, he allowed the light to enter creation and build everything up to a certain point. Then he said, die. Die means enough. Like we see in the Haggadah, dayenu, right? It's enough for us. The word die. Therefore, God's name is called Shaddai. Right? We don't always say it that way because out of respect, we say Shekai, but it's really Shaddai, which means that he said die. And how many levels did the light start from the bottom? So it says that there are 50 levels altogether between the top of creation and the bottom of creation, meaning like the very bottom of creation, which is where our world exists today. It wasn't that way before the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but that's the way it is right now. And the light stopped 18 levels from the bottom to allow a place for the reality of evil so that choice could exist. Because if there's no evil, if the light had penetrated all the way to the bottom of creation, then everything would have become holy, sanctified, and nothing could go wrong. And therefore, there'd be no free will whatsoever. So therefore, God stopped the light specifically and to give man a chance to participate in the completion of creation. It's like a mother who says, I left over this corner of the cake for you to ice, to her little daughter, or the father says to his son, here, you drive in the final nails. So God left over a small portion of creation for us to be able to participate in its completion. So there are 50 levels, and the light stopped 14 from the bottom. Mathematically, it's 50 subtract 14, which means the light came down 36 levels. And our job has always been, since creation, and certainly since the sin of Adam Arishon, to draw that light down to the bottom of all the 50 levels. And when that happens, Mashiach comes. That is the perfection of Maaseh Bereshis, of creation. So therefore, we take the menorah and we put it as close to the ground as we possibly can without actually putting it on the ground, because that would be a little disrespectful. Every other mitzvah, Shabbos candles, you put on the table, you put it on a shelf, you hold it up high to proclaim this is the mitzvah of lighting candles. We like to do our mitzvahs in a very respectful way. It's very unusual to put the nerot so close to the ground. One of the reasons we do that is also to tell people we're not using them as street lights. We're not using them to light our way. Otherwise, they'd be higher up, because the point, so close to the ground. But the main reason is because of the fact that we are taking the light of 36, which is embodied in the Ner Shel Chaynukah, and bringing that light to the very bottom. So therefore, we light close to the ground, as close as we possibly can, without disrespecting the mitzvah. And many different details. It's a very fascinating thing how something can become so complicated, so complex, and so detailed, and to have such a discussion about exactly what it is we're doing and how to do it. It's like you take a menorah, you light a candle, zehu. That's it. What else do you need to do? That's what we've been doing for how many? Why? It's like the matzah. The matzah on Pesach. People will tell you, when I was in Europe, my father handed me a piece, and that was it. It was a little thing like this, and that's what we did. What's all this? You have to measure exactly the weight, and it has to be made, so, and you have to chew it so quickly, and don't drink it the same. It's such a technical reality. The best thing is watching Bali Tshuva. People who are having their first Pesach Seder, authentically. They've never been to one before. I mean, they had one in their family growing up, and it wasn't done halachically, it was just done traditionally. So when they had the matzah, they took a bite and that was it. No pressure, and it might even be egg matzah. It's not smoother, it's easy to swallow egg matzah. And now they come to their first Orthodox, Seder, and they're being told, see this nice big piece of hard rock matzah? You have to eat that in 2 to 4 minutes. And don't stop. Just keep shoving it in. You just watch these people, because like a judge, putting it all in, like, seems so contrary to the way we're supposed to behave as Jews with derech eretz and but there are things being accomplished with all of this. There's the realities we're trying to create and access. Same thing with the menorah. It's not just about taking a candle and lighting it. I mean, on one level, that is good enough. There's you like the right time, the right way. So why all these details? Because all those details belong to Torah Shebal Peh. They belong to the oral law. Rav Yitzchak Hutner, who was the Rosh Hashiva Parashat Yitzchak in the 50s, one of the great minds of our current times, wrote a phenomenal, very deep and complicated set of books called Parashat Yitzchak, and in there he discusses the holidays, and he's talking about Chaynukah, and he's talking about the oral law being spread amongst the Jewish people, and you hear the word machlokus, which means argument. There's all this machlokus. When this opinion says, and that opinion says, and that opinion says, and what about this? And Yeshua means like so many opinions, right? And with machlokus is argument, such a negative thing. It's so nice, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. We all sit together as one people and they agree with everything. It's so much more pleasant as opposed to you're doing it wrong and this is the way he's like. And he says, but you don't understand. That's what it's been about. That's what God set up. He created the scenario to have all this disagreement in the Talmud. Why? Look at all the Torah that has emerged in the world, has emanated and spread because of all this disagreement. How many insights? I can tell you personally, when I used to go on a speaking trip, and someone would ask me a question, and they would agree with me, I would feel great. But if they argued with me and I had to come up with an answer, invariably it resulted in a new insight I never had before because of that question that they asked. And this is what he's talking about. And this is what it's all about. This is what rectifies the world. This emanation of Torah Sheba'al Peh, expanding it, adding to it. Someone gets up at a Shabbos table. They sat there and they look at a Rashi. There's a special mitzvah, for example, on Shabbos to give over a Devar Torah that's new, your own idea, something you came up with. A special mitzvah just on Shabbos. And it says that every time you do, your parents in the world, if they're no longer living and they're in the world to come, they have an aliyah each time because of your Devar Torah, because of your emanation of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So Chanukah is all about this. It's like you want the achdus, you want the unification, 100%. That will come. Mashiach will take care of all that, because the best thing about machlokus, in this sense, is you don't have to fight. There's no hatred. There shouldn't be any hatred. It's just arguments for the sake of truth to get to the bottom line. But in the sake of truth, it's like when the metal worker, he puts the metal to the grinding stone, and sparks go flying in all different directions because he's doing that. And every time those sparks come out, every time that Torah Sheba'al Peh is revealed in the world comes that much closer to its final rectification. That's what God made the world for. So, halachas, 100%. Disagreements, 100%. But Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, the ideas, the concepts, the realization of deeper levels of understanding, that's what we're about. That's what Torah is all about. And that's what Chanukah comes to help us with, because it's a portal to deeper levels of conceptual realization that we don't get all year round. And you have to be into it. You have to make a point of doing it, thinking it through. So this is a start. Mr. Hashem will continue next week, not necessarily with more halachas. In case you're going, well, I didn't enjoy that one. That was like, I want my money back. Fortunately, these ones are free, right? But it's like, what do I all that information? Well, yeah, 100%. But ultimately speaking, every halacha is just hashkafa. That's what we have to realize. When you just unwrap it, it's like you take an envelope and you open it up, and inside is the philosophy. So every halacha is just philosophy. You open the halacha up, there's a concept that drives it. The law exists because it embodies a certain idea that God is trying to get across to us to allow us to become perfectly, become more perfected and to participate in the perfection of his creation. So on that note, I bid you good night, unless anybody has any more questions for this evening.